Well, good afternoon and welcome to the fourth of our series of webinars on different specialisms within giving to support the work of parishes. Really good to see so many from across the diocese with us today. Our subject is digital giving, which comprises enabling people to give on your website, to the use of QR codes and the use of contactless card readers in our churches. And we see all of these as being extremely important ways of getting additional revenue, particularly from audiences who are not present in your church congregation. Within the church, we are focusing very much on maximising planned giving as being the principal source of funding, and ensuring and inviting as many people as possible to leave legacies to your church. But in terms of additional giving, digital giving is extremely important. And I'm grateful once again to be able to welcome the regional giving advisor from the National Church covering the Southeast, Jim Barker, who was previously Director of Fundraising for the Church Mission Society and now supports a number of us in dioceses across the Southeast. We're very grateful for all the national team does to support giving within this diocese. So Jim, without further ado, welcome. And if you can perhaps take us through your presentation, and during this time, do type in questions into the chat, because there'll be plenty of time within this 60-minute webinar to cover your questions. Jim, welcome.
Thank you, David. To give you an outline, just so you've got an idea of timings, my plan is I'll probably be speaking for no more than 25 minutes in terms of the presentation. So it should give us ample time for questions at the end, because I'm sure that each of you are approaching this from different perspectives and are doing different things. So it'd be good if we gave some time for questions at the end. So I'll go through my presentation first, which will hopefully cover off a number of those, but will help us in terms of setting the context for what we're talking about as much as anything else. Now, share screen is what I'm after. This one. No. Good. And what I need to do now is bring each of you up so I can still see your faces, which is great. Share. Good. Is that good? Give me a thumbs up if you can see this screen. And if you can only see one, that's fantastic.
That's great.
Good. So I'll give you a quick rundown in terms of what we're going to be looking at today. So the outline of the session, we're going to be talking about the importance of digital giving, why it's important, why it's becoming more important in what we're doing. The second is using online giving and something called QR codes, which since COVID, or thanks to COVID, we're becoming more and more familiar with. Introduction to contactless giving and what's involved in that. And also talking about the devices which are available through Parish Buying. And I'll talk about the importance of Parish Buying in this as well. And getting the most out of digital giving once you've started it, how to make best use of it. So I'll go through those points and then we'll have time for questions at the end. So first off, the importance of digital giving. First thing for us to always remember when we're thinking about giving is often it's a helpful reminder for ourselves that an average church receives 75% of all its income through the generosity of its parish, of its congregations, and those in its parish who give to support its mission and ministry. And that can't be kind of overlooked. Obviously, it's different portions for different people, but on average, we're talking 75% of the income. We know we live in an increasingly cashless society. If you're anything like me, you've left the house a number of times over the past few years, realized you've needed cash, and then had to turn around to your spouse or friends and said, have you got any cash on you? Because it's just not something that we walk around with in the way that we used to. So we need the right mechanisms in place to be able to give and to maximize the giving and the generosity that people want to show towards our churches. So digital giving is either donations which are given through a contactless device, or they're made online, and therefore they're an important way for churches to receive gifts. Online and contactless donations are typically higher than cash donations, and I'll be talking through that and why that is as well. That gives us some of the context as to why it's an important area for us to explore. look at cash is declining. Hopefully you'll be able to kind of get the gist of this chart. If you can't quite see it, the main one is to notice is the kind of the teal colored line, which is going up, and the black line, which is going down. And the teal line that's going up is the use of debit cards and how that's climbing in recent years. And the black line that's going down is cash, which is basically saying that cash, this is the numbers of payments in millions of pounds made that year. So we can see that throughout overall, we can see that some point during 2017, cash and card payment, debit card kind of crossed over as one ascended and the other one declined. But we know this ourselves from our own kind of spending habit and how we're using the cards and how we use our wallets. What are some of the benefits we can look at now? This is really interesting to us because the average digital donation is, if it's online, it's £41.63, and the average donation for contactless is £9.15. I should put another bar in this chart, which compares the average cash donation that a church receives, and that's around £2. So the average cash donation you'll get put into a plate in your average church is around £2. This is quite a marked difference, therefore, when we do contactless or we do online donations. We've got some theories as to why that might be. I think the most plausible for me is that when people are prompted to give, and they're prompted to give cash, what they give isn't a reflection of their generosity or a reflection of what they want to give. It's a reflection of the cash they've got in their wallet or their purse at that time. What contactless can do and what online can do as well is just push the people an extra bit further in terms of it doesn't really then limit on the amount of money they might have in their wallet. It's really a greater reflection of what they want to give. So those averages really do jump up. The average annual income that you're getting from a contactless machine is currently £1,213, and the average annual donations online is 700. Now, remember this is average as well, and people are still adopting this at quite a pace. So actually, I'm seeing contact machines frequently coming into contact with churches who have contactless machines, and they're getting their donations into the 5,000s, into £5,000 and above, and that's very, very common. And also we're seeing annual income online also getting close to the £2,000 or £3,000 a year. So they're not small amounts of money that we're talking about here, and it's money that's climbing and increasing. Okay, let's talk about online giving and QR codes and a little bit about how this works. So online giving is a donation via a web browser or through, whether that's on a phone, a tablet, or a laptop or desktop.
I'll try and claim.
Yes. This is
Good.
very odd.
The next one is in lieu of physical cash or contactless donations, and that's how that's working. And it makes it easy for a church to give physically or online, including online services. So if you're doing a lot of online services, it's a way for you to put a collection point in the presentation that you're giving online, enables people to click through while they're watching, and they can give that way. It's ideal for fundraising, so specific purposes that you're raising money for, and for visitors. And it's so familiar to so many of us. Many of us have given online donations in different shapes and forms. Probably the most common way is if you gave through something called Just Giving or a similar platform where you've given a spot where you've sponsored a friend or family member to do a particular kind of thing in aid of a particular charity. And also you can share your link for the giving page on your church website and on the church near you, social media, mailing lists, and through QR codes. So it's easy to distribute the link to enable people to give. How does it work? So there are some partners here which we need to get working. There needs to be a software provider. Software provider we would recommend to you is an organization called Give a Little. And it needs to work with SumUp or Stripe as a merchant account provider. And that will enable you then to do online giving. There are guides to how to set this up. If you go onto Parish Buying and search Parish Buying in Google, you'll be taken to the Church of England site to sign up for the Parish Buying. If you don't subscribe already, it will ask you to sign up. And if you do that, you can go through and find out how this works and how you can set it up for yourself in your church. But fundamentally, you need a software provider who provides all the snazzy front end of making things work. And SumUp and Stripe, which is the merchant account provider, the best way of saying to them is that's a little bit like your bank. They take and they process that donation and they ensure that donation gets through to the bank account of your church. Once you have that set up, it's very easy to set up a page and then have that page working and collecting money for you. So then you can advertise on your Church Near You website if you don't have your own church website. In the bottom left-hand corner, you can see there's a Give Now button that St. Michael and All Angels has placed there. And that will link you directly through to that page and asking people to give in that way. All quite simple. What Give a Little will also enable you to do is set up a QR code. As I said before, we're getting more and more familiar with QR codes and what they can do. If you do that and you want to share a link to your digital online giving campaign, you'll be given the option to create a QR code. QR codes are getting more and more popular. There was a time when I thought it was dying out, and then COVID came along, and suddenly people are much more used to kind of scanning that little black and white dotted picture into a smartphone, if they have a smartphone, and then going straight through to the page that that QR code takes them to. And since the COVID outbreak, we can see that QR codes has climbed and the use of them have climbed. And as I said, it enables smartphone users to easily access a web page by scanning that code, and that can become an invaluable part of the online donation offering. Particularly, I would say, at weddings and at christenings, and I'll say more about that at the end. And that's because you can drop that QR code in any particular material that you've got for your church and make that work. Lots of places you can add to your QR code for people to give directly to those giving pages. Orders of service, postcards you might have in the church, bookmarks, any newsletters or news sheets that you send around, and any invites or posters that you've got. Particularly valuable, as I said, for christenings and weddings, baptisms and weddings, where you have large numbers of people sat in your church. They want to give, they're happy to give, and what they will do is if they'll sit there and they will give a donation in that moment. Recently, we've had donations of, we had one donation of £500 that was reported from somebody who went to a wedding and they sat in the congregation and scanned it in. We've had a number of other donations of £200 and £300 of people doing exactly the same. They've come to a wedding, it's their goddaughter's getting married. They remember the church because it has family collections and they want to make a donation. In many ways, it's our obligation to be able to give them the mechanism by which they can make that donation. And QR codes are an ideal way of doing that. Let me talk about contactless giving next. So contactless giving is where donations are made through a contactless donation device using a bank card or a variety of smart devices. So a card or a smartphone or a smartwatch. We're all used to contactless paying in different ways, and it's fundamentally the same thing. If you've ever bought a coffee or made a small purchase at a small shop and somebody's handed you a little white tablet to tap your card against, it's exactly the same process. But to make it work, you again need 3 different providers and possibly a mobile data provider, if applicable, and I'll say more about that. You need a hardware provider, and I'll be talking about the hardware in a minute. You need the software provider, which is different for different devices, but 2 of the devices, which we'll talk about in a minute, also use Give a Little, and a merchant account provider as well. And that would be typically SumUp that you would use as a merchant account provider, and they would have the device that enable you to kind of click to give you a contactless donation. The hardware might also need a data mobile provider as well, if applicable. And that is because of we need to consider connectivity in our churches if you're using a contactless device. The contactless device does need to be connected to the internet, unless it's what's called an offline device, but I'll be saying more about that in a minute. So you don't need an internet connection for all devices to work at the point of making donation, but it certainly does help. There's lots of guidance about installing an internet connection available on the Church of England website and on Parish Buying again. I'll do that as a push for Parish Buying. Connectivity does not have to be through a broadband connection to your church. It can also be through Wi-Fi extenders. If you've got a broadband connection in the church, you might need an extension on that Wi-Fi signal to take it to a different part of the church where you want to have that contactless device. You can have SIM cards in the devices themselves, in the same way you'd have a SIM card in a mobile phone, which I've got mine here. On the side, I can insert a SIM card to it, which is what you do if you get a new phone. You also can have insert a similar SIM card into the device itself. and it will work in the same way, and you'll be able to get the internet connection you need from the mobile signal. You can also get mobile broadband routers where you insert a SIM card into a device similar to the one on the right-hand side there. There's a picture of, and that will also give you access to the internet through the mobile network. As I said, there's much more guidance that we can give you through the Church of England website and on Parish Buying around that. So what is Parish Buying? I'll say a little about this. It's a website and service provided by the National Church. It holds a range of goods and services for churches available, anything from energy to audio-visual equipment, and including these contactless devices. So suppliers have undergone due diligence and to ensure they provide good value and reliable service for churches, and it's free to use for more than one person, and more than one person in your church can register. You must go to the pages on Parish Buying to get discounts available to churches rather than to providers direct if you're thinking about purchasing a contactless device. So the starting point for a contactless device and online giving is to register for Parish Buying if you're not already registered. What Parish Buying also enables us to do is have the power of bulk buying. So with many providers, we've negotiated discounts. And in the case of Give a Little, there's an annual fee that Give a Little would normally charge, but we pay that fee as the National Church to anybody who's going in through Parish Buying. I think that's going to be my last plug to Parish Buying, but we'll see how we go. So the questions that you need to ask when you're thinking about a contactless device is, does your church have connectivity? And if it doesn't, how are you going to get connectivity into your church? Do you want to also take payments in addition to donations? Because if you do, you'll need to have two different devices to be able to do that. A contactless donation device won't enable you to take money for payments for goods and services. We need to stress that now. Do you need something that works out of the box? Do you want something that's easy to set up? Or would you like to manage that device yourself and how it appears and change the different campaigns and different things that you're fundraising for and therefore manage that device yourself? Do you want a tap and go option? Or do you want a more engaged donation experience in terms of how you want to set that up? And do you want a portable or securable or freestanding device? And also ask a question, where will it go in your building? Those are the things that you need to consider when you're looking at contactless devices. And also, do you want to use the same provider for online giving? And how much budget do you have available? So I'm going to talk through 4 devices which we're selling at the moment through Parish Buying to give you an idea of what they are. So I'll talk about the one on the far left and the one on the far right first. That might be the easy way of doing it. On the far left is something called a Collecting More. It's a very portable device. It's ideal for churches who want to be able to move a device around if they've got a number of different groups that meet in the church, if they have festivals and events they hold a lot of the time, and they can take that device, and as you can see, it's got a handle on the back, and you can move it anywhere, and it can therefore be much more kind of portable and free for anyone to kind of use where they want to use it. On the right-hand side, the Pay As Giving station fundamentally uses the same setup and uses the same software as the Collecting More, but it's a much more solid device. It can go somewhere, it tends to be fixed in a place that it stays, and it's good for churches who have a fair amount of frequent visitors. It also might be good for a larger church where you've got people who are leaving the church and making a retiring collection, and it's an easy way and very clear way that it's signposting someone to make a donation. The GWD MIDI, which is the one in the middle on the left, is at the moment our only offline offering. So if you can't get an internet connection into your church or get a mobile signal into your church, and in the end of the day, it's very rare that we actually come across churches in that position. Most churches will be able to get a contactless, will be able to get a mobile signal of some kind into their church in some way. But that we can use that, and we can use the GWD MIDI as an offline option. The other one is a GWD Skinny, which is perfect for churches with a lot of footfall that draw in a lot of visitors, because it stands up and it says, you've come here because not because you've come to worship, but because you've come because there's something of architectural interest in the church, or because the church has a particular heritage in some way, and so therefore you're visiting for that reason. And here's where you can give a donation for the upkeep of the church. So they're different devices for quite different purposes, and that's why one of the reasons you go through those questions. want to give you an idea of pricing around those devices so you get an idea as well. These are indicative prices at the moment, so prices do change around. But the upfront cost for collecting more, that's actually closer to £280 now, so apologies, I should have updated these this morning. So it's around £280 for collecting more. The transaction fee is between 1.1 and 1.3% if you go through Parish Buying. And a mobile data cost, in other words, if you want to get it working, you'll need it to get it connected to the internet. And if you don't have the internet in your church or any way of getting the internet, then it's a £42 a year cost to connect it to the mobile internet. The pay as giving station is £379. And again, the transaction fee is 1.1 to 1.3%. And you're talking again about a £42 cost of getting that mobile data sorted. GWD MIDIs and skinnies are quite different, all the GWD devices, and they range between £675 and £1,275. There's a monthly fee for those devices because they're maintained by GWD, which is a small business, operates them, and the monthly ongoing fee is £13.50 plus VAT. And the transaction fee is 1.19% plus 5p for any transaction. On top of that, you're talking about £95 upfront and £7.50 a month for the mobile data cost for those devices. Don't allow the cost to put you off a GWD device, particularly if you're in a church that has a lot of footfall. We see, I'll just take us back a slide now, for that tall, skinny model, we're seeing a really substantial uplift in donations because it really stands out and attracts people to it. So the return on investment that you get for those additional costs are really worth it for those churches. Okay, let me talk about getting the most out of contactless. So you've got to think about how to create the best environment to encourage giving, and you need good mechanisms to allow people to easily give at your church. Alongside that, you need to explain the need that people have to give and the impact their gifts make. And finally, trust is something that must be built to enable people to have confidence in the church and how it will spend its gifts. That's what, for this, we use an acronym called MINT, which stands for Mechanism, Impact, Need, and Trust. It's very easy to get a device in a church, relatively easy. Often that's the easier side of things, but simply having a contactless device or online giving won't crack the whole problem that you've got. You need to have the other elements where you're talking to people about the impact their donations make, the need there is for them to give, but also building trust that those people who are giving know where that money is spent. And you can do each of those things about the things by considering what are the things that you're going to display around your contactless device. What's the story that you're going to tell about your church? If your church has a fantastic mothers and toddlers ministry, and does that work? Don't be afraid to shout about it when you're talking about impact. If you're running a food bank from your church, talk about that as well. These are the things that this money goes towards supporting, if not directly, indirectly, in terms of the facilities of the building and the time and effort that it takes for you to continue to support those ministries. I would also kind of say 2 or 3 other things. Make it a team effort. Show a few people in your church how to switch on the device and turn it off and how to connect it to the internet so other people know how to work it and what doing. The old adage of location, location, location comes up here. So really think about where your device can work. If it's going to cause a queue for people leaving church, that can be a problem. Because if you find yourself 3rd or 4th in the queue, you might think, oh, I'll come back and do that later when the queue's gone down. But that can be problematic because inevitably people don't come back. So think about how it can be set up so it's convenient for people to stop and donate. Promote. So put an eye-catching poster around it to draw people's attention to the opportunity to give, but also build in those things around the need to give and the impact that different makes as well. And explain. Make sure you know how to people know how to give and the benefits of contactless giving. Perhaps give also on a short notice. My trick on this is for the first few weeks that you get a contactless device, bring it up and make it part of the notices. So it's not this strange thing that sits at the back of the church that nobody knows how to use, but you've already introduced people to show them how it's done. My other trick for you is as well, for big services of the year where you get a lot of people coming through, prime 2 or 3 people to leave the church early and use the contactless device as they go. What people who don't come to church that often, but might come once or twice a year, are basically taking your lead on how to behave in church. When the plate came around before, they knew what to do. They were putting money on the plate. Now their habits are different. They need to be inducted in those habits. Prime 2 or 3 people to leave the church early, give a contactless donation, and you'll be surprised about the number of people who follow through and give a donation as well. Good. When to use contactless? It's really loads. You can use it wherever. That's the joy of it. Use it in Sunday services and online services. We can do life events, weddings, baptisms, and funerals, as we've discussed. Midweek groups, e.g. Messy Church, fundraising events, and for visitor donations. Talked about each of those. Also for weddings and funerals in particular, if those are people who aren't regular churchgoers, you can also think about doing what we would call split appeals. If there's a particular cause that the deceased was close to the heart of the deceased or close to the heart of the married couple, you can offer the contactless device and online giving as a way for them to raise money, half which would go to their chosen cause and half would go to support the ministry of the church. One of the first things I learned in fundraising in my 30 years, it's better to receive 50% of something than 100% of nothing. So on those opportunities, just think about ways in which you can engage people through those kind of split appeals. Good. Questions? I've got an email address here, but also you will have David's email address. But we have a specific digital giving email address where any questions around digital giving can come through, and we will often forward those on to David if they come through, or if they're more complex, we can handle those as well. So if you can take a note of that, but as David said, he'll be sending around slides afterwards, so you'll also get that email address in those. I will now stop sharing so I can see my screen, and I'll take questions through the chat. Sorry if that was a bit of a ramble through for people. There was probably quite a lot of content within that.
Jim, no, thank you so much. That was really, really clear. It's a very sort of technical area, but you managed to make it extremely, extremely clear for everybody. So thank you.
Hopefully so.
Do, as you say, put the questions in the chat. I don't think, just have a look at the chat at the moment.
People, I can see some people are tapping away, and so getting themselves ready.
Splendid.
That's fine.
Well, let me just get people get things going slightly. You mentioned don't be afraid of the capital outlay because you'll get a return on this. Would you like to give people some sort of taste of that return in terms of how long what typical playbacks are for the various devices in different contexts?
Good. The biggest context that it makes is we would say something termed footfall, which is the number of people who are coming through your church in a typical month. That's going to make the biggest difference in regard to contactless giving, so the investment that you're making in that device. So we don't recommend contactless devices in churches where they have a weekly service, one service on a Sunday, and 30 people come along, because it won't get the footfall that's needed to make that expense necessary. If, however, that church might have 30 people in the congregation, but has an architectural feature that draws a lot of visitors in, that changes it. If also they're doing 30 or 40 life events in a year, that changes it again. But those things are around footfall, so that's what makes the difference. So the average income that you've got from a contactless device at the moment is around £1,200. So that typically says within 4 months, within 3 months, the device will have paid for itself, fundamentally, 3 to 4 months. And that's kind of what we see. We had one church recently who contacted us and said that had a donation of £700 into the contactless device, which came from someone at a funeral. And they said, we were so pleased we had the device because it's paid for itself twice over from just one person using it. And those are that kind of stories at the moment is coming out all the time.
Brilliant. So that's, except for the circumstance of the small church which nobody visits, which has no occasional offices and a small congregation and only one service. In most other contexts, we're looking at extraordinarily short payback times, aren't we? So it's definitely something to look at.
Good.
So let's pick up one or two of the questions. Darryl, thank you. Has anyone passed a mobile contactless device around with the collection plate, or are they just being used at the back of the church?
Good question. We would advise people against passing it around. and this is from experience which was borne out. You may have seen advertised, you might have even seen themselves, a contactless device that's been built into a plate that's been passed around. What we found when that was happening was it did two or three things. It slowed the collection down enormously, and that became awkward in the flow of the service. The collection was taking too long, because as it came around, people were getting their wallets out and then clicking to make sure the donation had gone through, or they were tapping their card and the donation hadn't been taken because they'd been too quick. So therefore, it's not something we would typically suggest doing it as a retiring donation, as a retiring collection, and therefore pointing to the device at the back for people to give to as they leave.
Thank you, Jim. And perhaps it's worth a word on the link with maximising planned giving, which was our subject last week, wasn't it? Because
yeah, it's a really good
our
point.
prime objective amongst the existing congregation is to get them to give on a planned basis every month, and to get as many people on as possible, rather than saying we're moving from a cash to a contactless. We want to make that step to planned giving. So how do you see the role of contactless alongside that of maximising planned giving?
Good. It's all around who your audience is. So the planned giving there is there for two groups of people, I would argue. One is your regular congregation who come along and need to be prompted to kind of set up a regular gift, and that's fantastic for them. Or for people who sit in the community, and the church is something they're quite passionate about. They don't come that often, but they want to see its mission and ministry continue, and that's good for them. Contactless giving is fantastic for visitors. That's the first thing. And it's also fantastic for those one-off appeals you're doing in a church for a specific purpose. And it's really good for them getting those money in and collections from those. So thinking about visitors, think about one-off appeals for things that you're doing. That's I say, is the difference. And of course, you might have a gift Sunday, which is around a particular mission partner or particular project that you're raising money for in a particular part of the world or closer to home. And again, contactless is ideal for that.
Is of course online. I suppose you can send a link to the online payment if you want to do that. So thank you.
Totally.
Now then, Susan asks about we have a SumUp contactless card holder. However, it is small and gets rather lost. I mean, sort of rather inconspicuous.
Yes.
Any tips on how to make it more visible? I mean, you spoke about posters, didn't you? What's the best way of doing this?
Yeah, so my guess is then, Susan, you're using something called a SumUp device with a tablet or smartphone next to it, and you've managed to pair the two up, and you've kind of created that way. In which case, that's fantastic.
No, it's actually just on its own, Jim. It's actually, I mean, it is about that big, basically. So it is we used to have what you call, but it kept failing. It didn't work. Yeah. So we just went to this little standalone SumUp that you can just press your scan your card or insert your card, but it is only literally that big, and it just does get lost basically.
Signage is the only thing I could recommend there, Susan. So therefore, think about if you have a display around it which talks about what your church is doing, why you need support, and then big arrows pointing towards that little device will ensure that it won't get lost. So you're thinking about find somebody in your church who have maybe a bit of point of sale experience, which some people do if they've worked in retail. If anybody who's worked in a shop, they'll be able to kind of say, what we do to sell this is do this. So therefore have some signs around it talking about what the money goes towards, arrows pointing towards the contactless device itself. That's what I'd recommend.
Mm-hmm.
Or
you don't know of, Jim, you don't know of, because I was interested with that pay as giving. So you don't know if there's any things that the little SumUp machine can slot into, can sit on top of.
No, other than the devices that we are selling through Parish Buying. So other than the pay as device, which effectively is that, it's a stand that has a tablet built into it and a SumUp machine at the top.
Right.
Indeed. And in fact, I've seen some figures which compared pay as with I think the collect-in bit, Jim, which shows that actually, although the pay as device is more expensive, it pays off quickly, because there's something about having something which is big and attractive looking, which you can't miss. It does seem to pay off that extra visibility. And there's also where you put it in the church. I mean, I was visiting a parish recently, which they had a board and they had the device on it, but then as the congregation left, this board got kind of moved very close to the church door, so they couldn't sort of get out without climbing over it. So there's something about strategic placement as well as the size of the device.
Good.
Can we move to gift aid? Leonard asks, how do you get gift aid, or is it only through GADS?
There's two ways. So yeah, the gift aid small donation scheme. Any donation of £30 or under on the contactless device is eligible for the gift aid small donation scheme. Of course, any device, any amount over the £30 doesn't do that. But all the contactless devices also give the option for people to give a gift aid declaration at the same time, and they can put in their gift aid details at the same time as they give a donation. So all the machines will enable you to do that. What, of course, you don't want to be doing is giving that option on Christmas Sunday morning as people are leaving the church. You're wanting people to do the tap and go option as they go. So just be careful on those times where you're selecting whether you use the gift aid declaration or not. That's the thing I would say there. Thank
you. Julie asks about how can we make the most of online giving?
Oh, yeah. Good one, Julie. I would, first off, it's around the places that you can put it. So as a direct link, if you have a church website, ensure it's on the church website. You will have a Church Near You webpage, and therefore put it on the Church Near You webpage. After that, I would really strongly urge you to use QR codes. You don't have to sign up to Give a Little to get a QR code. You can get QR code generators if you go into Google and Google QR code generator. It will give you an option to put a web address and it will create a QR code for that web address. You can then copy and paste that QR code and put it into the documents and places you want to put it. And then you can put it onto posters, orders of services, news sheets, wherever you want to put that. And that I would recommend is a really strong way of getting that message out there of here's how you can give to us online.
Brilliant, and thank you. And Malcolm says that he obviously wants a very big QR code on a very big poster. I don't think there are any faculty issues there, unless it's an enormous fixture. So go for it, and we'll have to have a little diocesan competition to see who's got the largest QR code. We've covered how to get one, which is great. Daryl says Parish Giving Scheme also has a QR code. Are there any issues in using this rather than the ones in the presentation?
Yeah, I have to be a little careful here because of my colleagues in the Parish Giving Scheme, but I'll be kind of blunt in this way. Parish Giving Scheme and its donation system is brilliant for those people who are already part of the Parish Giving Scheme, because what it will do is ask you to sign up and will ask you for a lot of personal details before taking a donation. And that's great for the people in your congregation, great for those people who are very close to your church, but for visitors, it's a barrier towards giving because they might not want to give their details. They might only want to give a £30, £50 donation, and they don't want to hand over that level of detail. So they'll hold off on that. And so that can provide a barrier for some people to give. My suggestion would be, if is to split it that way and go, great, the one-off giving online for people who have signed up at church in the congregation, then the Parish Giving Scheme way is the way to do that. But for visitors or those one-off people who you might come into contact with, then you look towards getting an organisation like Give a Little and sign it up that way.
Brilliant. Thank you. Thank you so much, Jim. Just having a little scroll. I think actually we have covered all the questions put on the chat. If there's anything which we've no need to cover to take the full hour. In fact, we'll probably get more people to watch the recording if it's shorter rather than longer. But don't hesitate. I'm going to take a moment, just unmute if there's something which has come to mind which you'd like Jim to comment on. I think, Jim, that your presentation was so comprehensive.
I've got Malcolm with his hand up.
Wonderful!
If you unmute Malcolm. And then also I've got Nick Hans-Clark, and if you unmute after Malcolm has asked his question, that'd be great. And I've got Susan waving as well. So I'll go Malcolm, Nick, and then Susan. That's great. Go for it, Malcolm. You're on mute at the moment, so I can't hear you. Old adage.
Right.
There we go.
I've just had a sort of leadership meeting, and I'm treasurer, and I find that I've taken on this digital giving side, and it's, you know, it's a big job. And I think what you've identified in my mind today, plus the previous meeting, is this needs to be a separate project managed by somebody, not necessarily the treasurer, but subordinate to somebody, because it is a really big job in terms of all the investigation you have to do on the software, the QR code, getting it organized, maintaining the website you've got in your church. It's not a 5-minute job, and
no, it's not.
I run out of 5 minutes. I'm just too busy.
Yeah.
So I think that's one thing I would say to people is that do make sure you've got a team dealing with this, and it isn't the basically management team, it's a subordinate team that's dealing with it. It's
excellent. And on that, Malcolm, what I've been saying to some churches as well, for very small congregations, if you can find a digital friend, somebody who's connected to the church, they might be the husband of somebody who comes to church, he doesn't come to the church himself, but somebody who can pick it up and kind of just run with it is what you're needing, who has a little bit of digital nous, and they will be able to help out, and there'll be a massive asset in that. I'll wholly endorse what Malcolm said. Thank you. Nick, you had a question. Nick Hans-Clark.
It was more a comment on the positioning. We got a pay-as machine shortly before a school service, and thought, great, we'll have it out for the school service, and hopefully people will use it. The problem was the positioning. It was put on the table by the door so it would be visible, but of course you had parents standing immediately in front of it. So you've got that dichotomy, and in fact nobody used it. Yeah,
I think this is because I think this is tied into Malcolm's point, is you need someone who's also going to learn from what's working and what's not. So they're kind of going, okay, so that's it, so what are we going to try next, and then trying something else out as well.
Yeah, and in terms of positioning, you really need to get the device and try it in various different positions to ensure that you have reasonable Wi-Fi connectivity. We've actually got an extender on our Wi-Fi because it's a long way from the route. So on that, just one other thing which I mentioned in the previous one, in terms of web giving, I was astounded a couple of years ago, shortly after our first foray into that, to receive a £1,000 gift-aided donation.
There we go. Thank you. That's a perfect example that, you know, sort of when we're dependent on cash, it limits people's generosity in a strange way. That's great. Thank you. Susan, you were next.
Thanks, Jim. Yeah, it was just coming back to QR code. So that's certainly something that we've not gone down. So again, it was just we do use give a little on our website. So did you say we can go get a QR code from them?
Yes. Or you don't even have to. Yeah, if you log in to Give a Little, and then go into your campaigns, and then in each campaign you can do I forgot what the word is now. It's either publish. Yeah, it's publish, and then with one of your options on publish is to create a QR code. And if you
okay. So we can explore. All right, thanks.
Yeah, do. If you explore, if you get stuck, come back to digital giving. And somebody will send you instructions on how to do that.
Okay, thank you.
Not at all. Tim, I see you got your hand up.
I was wondering about the contactless machines. Can you have one that you preload, as it were, with an amount? And secondly, and this would be our challenge, do you have to have someone standing by, as it were, to see that it's done properly?
Good.
We're a very small church, but we have extremely high giving, online giving, actually, through the giving scheme. But we are defeated slightly at Easter and Christmas services, where people just don't have the cash.
Yes.
But we can't decide. Well, we're split, actually. We can't decide whether to have one or not have one.
Yes. So all of the devices will give a bespoke, you can bespoke according to what the gift amounts are that you're asking for. So if I was to take you in any direction, I'd take you down either the collecting or a pay as giving station. And then you can decide what those amounts are. So if you wanted to put 5, 10, 30 pounds, and therefore people would click which of those or tap which of those they wanted to give, and then that would go through from there. Each of them also give the option to say, or specify your own amount, and somebody can tick that and then put in what their own amount is, and that will work in that way as well. So that's covered that side of things. There was 2 parts to your question. There was one which was about the amounts, and the other.
Well, the other one is, can you have it, as it were, unattended at the back?
Yeah, they're all designed to be unattended.
Right.
The least of the device which I would recommend that least with would be a collect-in, because it would it's naturally more portable. It's great to be able to put on a countertop as sort of if you're doing a messy church event, that kind of thing. But all of them you can leave wherever you choose, and they're designed to be self-service.
Thank you.
Brilliant. Well, I think we've exhausted a range of really helpful and very practical questions. So at that point, can I first of all thank Jim? Thank you so much, Jim, for your support today, as well as with last week's webinar, and to thank all of you for joining us. I do hope that you will find this helpful as a team, as a Mission Enabler team. We're here to provide support, and I'm part of my role as Mission Enabler for stewardship and evangelism, to provide the support that's required. So do let's keep in touch in this. We will disseminate the recordings, which you can share with others at your in your parish. And we have our last webinar in this series on the 24th of May, which is on funding capital projects, major capital projects for refurbishment, new buildings, reordering, whatever. And that is with Eleanor Stead, who is the Deputy National Giving Advisor. And so every blessing in your ministry of encouraging others to exercise the gift of giving. And we'll look forward to seeing you again very shortly. Thank you so much.